Chris Carter here from the Locked On Steelers podcast, and it is crossover Thursday, which means we've got Aaron Freeman of the Locked On Falcons podcast breaking down this key matchup. I'm going to lead off talking about why I think there are some serious parallels between these teams, including their quarterback situation. Who is best suited? Is it Russell Wilson with the Steelers or Kirk Cousins with the Falcons? That next here on crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast with Locked On Falcons. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons, but also Locked On Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And because it is both Locked On Falcons and Locked On Steelers, it is a crossover Thursday. And today's episode is presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So if you don't know me, I am one of your humble hosts. Aaron Freeman covers the Atlanta Falcons for Locked On Falcons. Been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at falcons.com, RIP. And of course, I am joined by Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. And we appreciate each and every one of you guys that is everydayers of each of our podcasts. That means you make it your first listen or first watch each and every day. And if you want to become an illustrious everydayer of either one of the Locked On Falcons or Locked On Steelers podcasts, all you have to do is subscribe or follow on YouTube for free or wherever you listen to podcasts. So, of course, today is a crossover Thursday, the first crossover Thursday of the 2024 season for Locked On Falcons, Locked On Steelers. We're going to be talking all about this week 1 matchup between the Falcons and Steelers, the biggest stories, the key matchups, keys to victory, all throughout today's episode. It is a new era of Falcons football, and it's a somewhat blend of new football for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Year 17 of Mike Tomlin, so that's old. But there's new things going on in Pittsburgh, new faces in Pittsburgh. Some of them are very familiar to Falcon fans, a lot more familiar to Falcon fans than they are to Steeler fans. New quarterback and play caller in Pittsburgh, right? New quarterback and play caller, also a new head coach in Atlanta. That head coach, Raheem Morris, old protege of Mike Tomlin from their shared days with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But we're looking at a lot of the parallels between these two teams, Chris. And, starting with the Pittsburgh Steelers, talking about that new quarterback, that new play caller, Arthur Smith, Russell Wilson. How do you think those two guys are going to blend? Because it feels like whichever one of these play callers and quarterbacks, Zach Robinson, Kirk Cousins here in Atlanta, blends the best on Sunday, probably is going to come out of this game with a victory. Is that correct?
No, I think that's a big part of the story of these two teams. These are two teams that have, there's differences. Like, for example, new head coach and Raheem Morris, who, by the way, is very close to Mike Tomlin. You know those guys' history. Those guys have been close for many years. And Mike Tomlin's talked about Raheem Morris in a very high manner. There's a lot of respect from head coach to head coach there. But you look at how Raheem Morris just got there. Mike Tomlin, obviously, there's a difference there. But you look at these quarterbacks, and you see a lot of similarities. New offensive coordinators coaching a new offense. Both of these teams have playmakers that they're very excited about, and they have these older quarterbacks that didn't work out in their last locations, and now they're trying to work out with these new ones, trying to figure out their last big contract that they're going to get in the NFL. Kirk Cousins already has that, I guess, with the Falcons, but the Steelers did not need to give one to Russell Wilson because of his contract with the Broncos. So right now, Russell Wilson is literally making league minimum salary for the Steelers to be where he's at. But it still does not change the fact that both of these teams are looking for veteran quarterbacks who've been in the NFL for a long time to basically guide the way for these young offenses to make headway. And I do think these are young offenses. You look at guys like Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson and Drake London on the Falcons side. You look on the Steelers side, you got George Pickens, Najee Harris, Pat Freiermuth, a lot of guys on rookie deals here that are trying to become three-headed monsters for their teams, but have been held up because of either poor coordinatorship on the offensive side of the ball or poor quarterback play. And both these two teams were plagued with Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Mitch Trubisky, whoever you want to say it was. They didn't have that help. And now you have those same playmakers with now these new veteran quarterbacks on both sides. And I guess this is part of what I pose a question to you. I think one of the strengths the Steelers have been able to rely on is that, look, Arthur Smith knows who Russell Wilson is, and Russell Wilson has had success playing in the kind of system that Arthur Smith likes, which is a very run-balanced offensive system that calls for the quarterback to make plays when it's time to make plays, but to not be the person that necessarily dominates the production of the offense. He's part of a system there that's based off of the run game. If the Steelers could achieve that, I think it would be very helpful to Russell Wilson to fit into the offensive system. But what's the system that you get from Zach Robinson over there in Atlanta as the offensive coordinator, and how he fits with Kirk Cousins?
Well, Zach Robinson comes from the Rams coaching tree under Sean McVay. Spent the last 6 years there in LA under Sean McVay, and sort of is considered by, depending on who you ask, sort of one of his best proteges. And that Sean McVay coaching tree has been pretty good in the NFL. You look at Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota. Those guys have been pretty good play callers. I'm sure Steelers fans, maybe think Zach Taylor is maybe a little overrated, but we won't hold those biases against y'all. But I think there's the expectation that Zach Robinson will have a similar level of success and be able to produce, high caliber offense here in Atlanta with Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins has a lot of familiarity with Sean McVay in similar style offenses, right? His first OC in Washington was Sean McVay before he moved on to LA. He had Kevin O'Connell for a year as a quarterback's coach. He went to Minnesota and spent several years playing under Gary Kubiak's style of offenses under Kevin Stefanski, Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak, all of them being Shanahan disciples in terms of the similarities between that. And then obviously the last 2 years under Kevin O'Connell, another McVay disciple. So there's a lot of familiarity between Kirk Cousins and this offense. It's just a lot of the same concepts that he's been running for, the better part of a decade in his NFL career. So I think that's giving a lot of hope and optimism that he's going to be able to hit the ground running in this offense. But, he didn't play in the preseason. He's coming off the injury. So I'm expecting a little bit of rust. So I'm not expecting to sort of see peak Kirk Cousins coming out of the gates. But, the faster he can acclimate to this relatively new system, the better for the Falcons, I think, this coming Sunday. And I'm curious, Falcon fans have very strong opinions about Arthur Smith. They don't tend to be positive. But I'm wondering, where are Steeler fans with Arthur Smith? There was a lot of scrutiny, I think, put on his offense during the preseason. Do you feel like there's some concern that may carry over into the regular season?
Well, see, that's a big part of this, right? Is Steelers fans look at what happened in Atlanta, and they're very caught. There's some that are cautious, like, wait a second, like that didn't work out. He didn't know how to use Bijan Robinson. But there's also some acknowledgement that, like, hey, when he got to Atlanta, he was told to build around Matt Ryan. Then all of a sudden, he didn't have Matt Ryan anymore. And there was also like, okay, well, this is the guy who was building his offense in Tennessee around the running the football and the offensive line. And then they got a bunch of skill guys to not, and not great offensive linemen in the early parts of the draft when he got there. And so there was some conflict about that. I think what most people on the Steelers side of things that are very confident about Arthur Smith are saying, they're talking about, well, wait a second, let's look at the last time he was actually an offensive coordinator, which of course was the Tennessee Titans for the 2 years that have still been the best 2 years of Derrick Henry's career. Everyone knows he's King Henry nowadays, and he's done amazing things with the Titans, and now he's with the Ravens. But you go back and you look at those years, the best time that he had was when he was with Arthur Smith, who prioritized the run, balanced it, did so with Ryan Tannehill, with A.J. Brown as like the lone really receiving weapon of that team. And people in Pittsburgh are wondering, can he replicate what happened there with the Pittsburgh Steelers? Now, no one's asking Najee Harris to become Derrick Henry over that, of course, but they're saying like, hey, people are very confident in Najee Harris and Jalen Warren as a duo. Cordero Patterson is a third option. If this offensive line that they've been investing high picks in for the last 2 years, and then Najee Harris and Pat Fryer with Jalen Warren and George Pickens, if all those guys can add up to being solid playmakers, with Russell Wilson just simply being the captain to guide the way, not necessarily to throw 50 times a game, that's where people's confidence is. And if they can achieve what they were kind of doing in Tennessee years ago when Arthur Smith was their offensive coordinator. They think that coupled with the Steelers defense, that's where the danger is if you're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, they got to get there in the first place.
Yeah. I will just say this for the Steelers fans that are familiar or curious on my thoughts on Arthur Smith's offense. I will just basically say, I think a lot of talk is about the quarterback. I think a lot of talk is about the skill position players. That was a big topic of conversation in the last couple of years here in Atlanta. But I think the truth, the core of the Arthur Smith offense is it works when the offensive line plays well. When the offensive line struggles, his offense doesn't particularly work. And so I do wonder a little bit about that because I know that's some of the concerns with Pittsburgh right now, given the injury to Isaac Seumalo and the sort of shuffling that is going on at the offensive tackle position. So that gives me a little bit more confidence going into this matchup because I don't know if the Steelers' offensive line is going to be as solid and gelled as it needs to be in this game, as it may be later in the season once they figure out all these issues and have everybody healthy. But I'll be curious to sort of see how that offensive line, especially given how young it is. You talk about the youth elsewhere on the offense. That to me is going to be a big part of Pittsburgh's success, not only on Sunday, but also throughout this season.
Absolutely. I think that's the story for both of these teams is figuring out where does their offense go with their new coordinators and with these new veteran quarterbacks that came from other teams where people are wondering, are they washed or are they actually ready to be rejuvenated?
Absolutely. So we'll talk more about the defenses for both of these teams as we continue. Both teams have similar parallels where they've made some significant defensive additions this offseason. And Chris and I will talk as we continue today's Crossover Thursday about what those additions will mean. Patrick Queen, Justin Simmons, Matthew Judon, how will those guys impact this matchup? And we'll get into that, guys, as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. Guys, I want to tell you about PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, PrizePicks, it's you against the numbers. All you got to do is pick more or less on up to 6 player stat projections, and you can watch the winnings roll in. And if you're looking to get in on the action because sportsbooks aren't available in your state, PrizePicks is. With fast withdrawals that are safe, secure, you can get your money in as quick as 15 minutes. If you head on over to the app right now, you can look at some more or less projections for, hey, Najee Harris, talking about the run game, but hey, 8 yards, more than 8 yards, you get some. Bijan Robinson, can 95 yards do it? More than that, less than that when it comes to rushing and receiving yards? So check it out by downloading the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive your $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. So as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, Locked On Steelers, Crossover Thursday, myself, Aaron Freeman, Chris Carter, talking about the new era of both Falcons and Steelers football, and we're going to be talking about the new additions for both teams on the defensive side of the ball. But there's also a new era of the Locked On NFL podcast with 2 shows daily with Tyler Rowland giving you that NFL espresso first thing in the morning and Tony Wiggins giving you that real talk from the barbershop. Find the new version of Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So, Chris, we talked already about kind of the parallels between these two teams with new quarterbacks, new play callers on offense. Let's talk about some of the parallels between these two teams with new additions on defense. With the Falcons, their big splash on defense, much more recent than the Steelers' big splash, which is adding Patrick Queen. But the Falcons just 3 weeks ago added Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon, and those two guys, 2 Pro Bowlers in their previous stints in Denver and New England, are hoping to add a big shot of adrenaline to this new Falcons defense. And talking about those Falcons defenders for a second, I'm wondering, I think Judon's going to be huge for the Falcons this season because anybody who knows anything about the Falcons knows that the biggest issue with the Falcons, while in recent years, maybe the quarterback, but going back more than just the last couple of years, has been their pass rush and their lack thereof. And this is the first time maybe that the Falcons will have a double-digit sack guy since 2016 when Vic Beasley did it, 8 years ago. So I think Judon's going to be huge, but Justin Simmons being brought into the table, to join Jessie Bates, the Falcons may have the best safety duo in the NFL, and that's going to be huge to kind of deal with this Steelers passing attack. But I'm curious, Chris, when we talk about Patrick Queen, what are you expecting from him to bring to the Steelers defense this offseason?
Well, I think there's a lot of expectations for Patrick Queen in the sense that he's going to be their most complete linebacker they've had since Ryan Shazier, which honestly this franchise has been looking for since he got paralyzed in 2017. And that's not to say that Patrick Queen is going to be the best linebacker in the NFL, nor do they think he's going to be. But they've needed that piece for all the other things they've been able to do in the NFL for a few years now. Because whereas, yes, you know what? The Falcons adding Justin Simmons to Jessie Bates, that's a heck of a safety tandem. And that might be the best safety tandem in the NFL. But the Steelers, they're looking at things a little bit differently. Whereas, like you said, the Falcons haven't had a double-digit sack man since 2016.
Yeah.
The Steelers, up until 2021, or 2022, excuse me, when TJ Watt missed half the season, the Steelers had the longest streak in the history of the NFL of leading the NFL in sacks, and largely because TJ Watt has now led the NFL in sacks 3 out of the last 4 seasons, and the only time he didn't was when he missed half the season. And then you throw in Alex Highsmith, who can get double-digit sacks. And then you throw in Cam Heyward, who before last year had back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. And then you throw in guys like Larry Ogunjobi. And now you have a young riser in Keanu Benton. And then you also have a young riser in Nick Herbig, and guys that they're very excited about up front. And then now Joey Porter Jr. fits in there in the secondary. He's playing well at cornerback. Minkah Fitzpatrick is already a first-team All-Pro safety multiple times over, arguably the best safety in the NFL. You throw all those factors in. Patrick Queen's role in this defense is simply, hey, just be the in-between guy. Don't try to make all the plays. Don't try to be the leading interceptor or the leading, sack man. Just stuff the run, keep everything coordinated, and play solidly in the middle of the defense. That's all the Steelers are asking Patrick Queen to do. And here's the thing. If he does that at a high level, he's extremely valuable to the Steelers. But even if he does, he's not nearly the best defensive player because TJ Watt is just an indestructible force on the pass rushing line. And then he's bolstered by Alex Highsmith, who also is very disrupting. And then Cam Heyward, who was injured last year, is healthy this year, and he just got a 3-year extension. They're excited about him. And Keanu Benton, watch out for him, the young man out of Wisconsin. He's a problem. They have so many other things that offenses have to worry about when playing this defense that if Patrick Queen just does really well, and it's just if he doesn't get to Roquan Smith level or Fred Warner level or the best of the best linebacker level, that's fine. As long as he's doing well in coverage and doing well against the run, that'll do a lot for the Steelers defense. And that's where I think there's parallels here because both teams have made big additions. But I think the floor that the Steelers are coming from on defense versus the Falcons is much higher simply because they've had that last year. They were 6th overall in scoring. The Falcons were 18th.
Yeah. You rattling off all those names of good pass rushers in Pittsburgh just made me a little jealous because the Falcons just want one of those guys and Pittsburgh has 7 of those guys. And it's just just break us off a little bit. Just one guy.
You had Bud Dupree. What happened?
Well, he was one of our best guys last year. But yeah, I think you're right with Queen. I think it's going to be interesting to sort of see. He doesn't have to be the world's best linebacker. I think you're right in that because he's surrounded by a lot of good players on the front. You have Minkah Fitzpatrick. You have a very young up-and-coming cornerback in Joey Porter Jr. You bring in Dante Jackson to sort of stabilize the other spot opposite him where you had major problems there. I guess for me, when I look at the Steelers defense, there aren't a lot of weaknesses, right? And I think the one area where I would be okay, maybe the Falcons can attack and exploit this is maybe the middle of the defense where Patrick Queen is going to be. And it's kind of where Patrick Queen is, throw it to against the other guy, Landon Roberts, or, test this rookie undrafted cornerback in BD Bishop that may be the starting nickel for you guys going into week 1. Those to me are the main weaknesses with the Steelers defense. And I'm just curious, do you feel like because of all the pieces that the Steelers have around them, you know, it must be nice. I wonder, Chris, it's got to be nice to have a defense that you know is just automatically going to be a top 10 defense every single year. But is it one of those things where it's like you can deal with some question marks at some of these other positions, you know, in coverage or whatever, just because you know the pass rush can get home, because you know you have other playmakers there, and those guys can kind of compensate for maybe any perceived weaknesses at some of those other spots?
Absolutely. That's the whole point of this, is that the Steelers aren't looking at this and to say like, oh man, they need all these guys to step up. They need these guys to fill in roles. They need to be role players in the defense. Like even Joey Porter Jr., who they're very confident in his second year as a cornerback in the NFL. They're not asking Joey Porter Jr. to go be Patrick Surtain or Richard Sherman in his prime or Darrelle Revis or anything like that. They're asking for him to go out and just be a really good to solid cornerback that can just not get beat for the big play, keep things contained, and make all the right plays to allow it to come down to, hey, you can't get big plays on the outside because you're targeting the corner out there. But while you're staring down that receiver that's further down the field, TJ Watt's breathing down your neck. That's where the Steelers are hoping for. And also TJ Watt's not just a pass rusher. He can drop back in coverage. You know, if you listen to, I forget which podcast Sean McVay was on this offseason, but there was a podcast that Sean McVay was on. He was talking about when they played the Steelers, and he was just like how annoying it was to coach and prepare for TJ Watt. He's like, all game long, we said, hey, wherever he lines up, whenever he's up there, we got 2 blockers on him because we're not letting that guy beat us. And then it was like the first drive of the second half when the Steelers played the Rams, and they were just looking at the play, and TJ Watt is lined up off the ball, and they're like, why is he doing that? Why is he lining up like an off-ball linebacker? And then they throw a pass and he intercepts it, and they're like, how does he do those types of things? We planned for him to do this, and he's over here doing that. And those are the types of things that I think that the Steelers have in their tool bag, where the TJ Watt can do those things. Even Alex Highsmith in like their game against the Browns last year where they won, he had a pick 6. So like their versatility is going to be a huge advantage to them, whereas so that like Landon Roberts, who was with the team last year and played very well, but Patrick Queen, Deshaun Elliott, all those guys, all you got to do is stick to your very limited specific role, and that will help this defense that already has its superstars be that much better.
Yeah, and I think with the Falcons, the parallel is they're hoping that Justin Simmons and Matthew Judon will make the players that are the Falcons version of their star players, Jessie Bates, AJ Terrell at the quarterback, Grady Jarrett, and David Onyemata up front on that D-line. They'll make those guys better, and those guys will be able to make some of those game-changing plays that you just talked about TJ Watt making. And that was something I pointed out earlier this week on Locked On Falcons when going back and watching that Rams game to sort of see how this style of offense under Zach Robinson is going to match up with the Steelers game. And I noted that basically they've chipped TJ Watt every single play, but you can't stop him. You can only hope to contain him. And he still made a game-changing play that helped the Steelers win that game last year. But I think with Judon and Simmons, you're hoping that those guys can really enhance the already playmakers the Falcons have, so that when you talk about that floor for the Falcons, that floor or that ceiling goes up for the Falcons, and again, maybe not be on the same level as the Steelers defense this upcoming season, but can at least close that gap and really present some problems, especially on Sunday against this Pittsburgh offense. And hopefully with the addition of Judon and Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata up front, they can take advantage of this young Steelers offensive line that we were talking about a little bit earlier. And on that note, I think that's a perfect way to transition to, what we're going to talk about next on today's Crossover Thursday, which is some of the keys to victory. Can the Falcons D-line control the line of scrimmage and key up on the run as one key to victory? And we'll break down what Chris thinks are going to be 3 of the keys for the Steelers to walk away from Sunday with a victory. And we'll do that as we continue today's Crossover Thursday. And guys, I want to tell you about LinkedIn, right? NFL teams spend all summer trying to find quality professionals to fit their roster. And you can do the same this fall with your small business, but it's so much easier for you because you don't have to sweat it out in training camp, because you have LinkedIn Jobs who have the tools that are going to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just any old job board. They're going to help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else. even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't use other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Join the 2.5 million small businesses that use LinkedIn for hiring by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So Aaron Freeman here of Locked On Falcons, joined by Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers, talk keys to victory on a crossover Thursday episode, both Locked On Falcons and Locked On Steelers. And that is, of course, presented by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So talking keys to victory, Chris, what are like the three most important things for the Steelers to do in order to walk away from week one with a win?
For one, the Steelers have to take away Bijan Robinson, who I think is a major part of this Falcons offense if they want to make it work this year. Kyle Pitts is certainly a threat. Drake London's certainly a threat. But if they can take away Bijan Robinson and force Kirk Cousins to be one-dimensional in this game, and I know that sounds very boring to people who listen to Keys to the Game, but that is very much who the Steelers are. The Steelers are not some new age team that's coming at you and trying to say, oh, if we take this over here, the passing game is going to work. No, they are very much old school. Stuff the run so they can rush the quarterback. That is their plan. So if Bijan Robinson getting loose, guess what? Steelers are in trouble because that's the whole crux of their defense. But their defensive front has been relied upon, has been invested into, and they're relying upon this year to be much better than it was last year. Cam Heyward was hurt all last year. Larry Ogunjobi was hurt all last year. They were down to practice squad linebackers for most of last year. This year, they've gotten a whole new crew of guys, and both Ogunjobi and Heyward seem very healthy going into the early part of this year. They're much more confident stuff in the run. So I think that's key number one. Stuff Bijan Robinson, get after that. Number two is, I wouldn't say win the line of scrimmage, neutralize the line of scrimmage on offense. Make it about Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, and the Steelers playmakers out of the backfield. You do that, it allows the Steelers on offense to do what they hope to limit the Falcons from doing, and that's have a balanced attack. They're not going to ask Russell Wilson to throw 50 times in this game unless they're down by a lot of points. They're asking Russell Wilson to say, hey, throw 25 to 30 times, and don't have most of them have to be from 2nd and 8, because they're hoping that the Steelers run game can at least get 3, 4, 5 yards on first downs most of the time, and then set up 3rd and 2s, 3rd and 3s, getting more of those situations so Russell Wilson can take advantage of more of those spots, move the sticks on most occasions, maybe make big plays on some of those occasions. Those are those things that I think the Steelers are looking for at the line of scrimmage. I know those are very basic things, but I think that's certainly a part of it. But part of it for me also, and this is my third big key, is getting Kirk Cousins to make mistakes. Now, the last 2 times the Steelers have played Kirk Cousins, they have forced him to throw 2 interceptions both of those occasions. One of those games they won because they were able to dominate the rest of the field, and they were able to, when he was with what are the Commanders now, used to be a different team in Washington. They dominated that game, got him to throw 2 picks, and that was how they won that game. The last time they played, though, was when he was with the Minnesota Vikings, and he threw 2 interceptions then. But the difference was they allowed Dalvin Cook to run for 200 yards and get 2 touchdowns. That is why, again, they can't allow Bijan Robinson to do that. So if they stop Bijan Robinson, they still have to be the turnover demons that they expect to be this year with being a top defense. So that's why that's my third key. Key 1, stop the run. Key 2, neutralize the line of scrimmage enough so that Najee Harris and the run game can be solid. And it's about the playmakers, less about the offensive line. And then, of course, when you force Kirk Cousins to be one-dimensional, make him pay and create the turnovers.
Yeah, I think those are all great keys to victory for the Steelers. And, a couple of those mirror kind of what I think the keys to victory for the Falcons. 1, I think, is stopping the run. 2, keep Kirk upright. And 3, generate some explosive plays. Talking about stopping the run, yeah, it is basic, but football is a pretty basic sport. And, we know Arthur Smith tends, from his days in Atlanta, he tends to be a little bit conservative with his play call. He's going to run the ball on early downs. You want to make Pittsburgh one-dimensional. As you said, Russell Wilson does, the goal is not to have Russell Wilson drop back and throw the ball 40, 50 times. And if you're the Falcons, you want Pittsburgh to play that way because that's playing left-handed from their perspective. And if you can get those stops on early downs, put them in some 3rd and longs, hopefully this Falcons pass rush with Matthew Judon, Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata can take advantage of maybe some of the question marks that the Steelers have up front on their offensive line. And it's kind of the opposite thing with keeping Kirk upright, right? The biggest strength of the Steelers, we just talked about it, is their front, right? That's got to be neutralized or contained. J.J. Watt is going to get doubled and chipped, but that's going to lead to a lot of one-on-ones for the other Steelers rushers. And as Chris broke down earlier, those other guys know how to eat when it is served to them. And there's been a lot of hype for the Falcons offensive line. And to me, they have to go out there and prove that they can hold up against this Steelers front. And then that third thing, generating explosive plays. The Steelers gave up the second least number of 10-plus yard scoring drives last season, right? Matriculating the ball down the field against them is not going to work. I'll tell you that. But getting explosive plays, they did give up a lot of explosive plays last year. You saw that in that Rams game last year, where a lot of those came from Puka Nacua, and the player that the Falcons are expecting to kind of fill the Puka Nacua role in this Falcons offense this year is Drake London. So if they can get him going, the offensive line can keep Kirk upright, get him the time to find Drake London on those crossers and those dig routes and all those things that Zach Robinson is going to port over from his days in LA. That can be a big part, and that's going to allow the Falcons to score enough points so that it's going to make the Steelers play from behind, which is the way that they don't want to play. They want to have that lead and pound the rock. So I think those are kind of the 3 keys to victory. As you said, they're boring. We'll probably be repeating a bunch of these in the upcoming weeks throughout the season, but that's just kind of how football is. You just got to do the basic fundamental things. And if you do those things effectively, you will be put in a position to win football games.
And again, I think this paints the parallel picture between these two teams right now. Whereas, yes, the head coaches are old and young, but you look at new quarterbacks, you look at teams that are trying to win with these new quarterbacks in the ways that specialize to how the rest of their personnel lines up. It adds up to me to be teams that are trying to win in very classic ways of football because they don't have the supreme superstar quarterbacks. But I also think that there's teams that have shown you don't need the supreme superstar quarterbacks to be really good in this league. Look at the Lions last year with Jared Goff. There's team. Look at the Niners with Brock Purdy. You don't necessarily need now. Certainly, having Patrick Mahomes doesn't hurt, right? Like no one's saying that you can just win the Super Bowl without a quarterback. But there are ways to be among the best teams in the NFL when you don't have one. And that's where both of these teams are trying to achieve. I think it will be a battle of wills to see who achieves it the best Sunday, 1:00 in Atlanta.
Absolutely. And the Steelers have dominated that will competition over the 60 years that they've been playing the Falcons. I think this is the most lopsided matchup probably in NFL history for teams that have existed for as long as these two teams, where the Steelers are 15-2-1 against the Falcons all time. So I'm hoping maybe we'll get a third win from the Falcons in not in my lifetime, the second one in my lifetime, but a third one in probably anybody else's on the planet's lifetime. So we'll see if the Falcons can do the impossible, which historically has been beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, or if the Pittsburgh Steelers will continue to dominate this matchup and Mike Tomlin can go to his former protege and Raheem Morris and say the master is still the master and the student hasn't become quite the master. So we will continue to have you guys covered here at Locked On Falcons, Locked On Steelers as the week unfolds to get you ready for this Sunday matchup between the Falcons and Steelers. Continue to make us your first listen by subscribing and following for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, check out Locked On NFL as your second listen. And, go check out PrizePicks, see what you can win this weekend with some of these more or less predictions on the stat projections. That's going to do it for us here between myself, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers. Hope you guys have a great day. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.